This came out a lot faster than I thought it was going to, and I don't really know how to gauge how fast I'm going to absorb audio content. It just so happened over the last few days, being home alone, having a lot more free time than I thought I would, I absolutely inhaled the next audiobook, which I am going to talk to you guys about. I don't know how fast I'm going to be able to turn these things around. I swear my wife reads like a book a day. She is an exceptionally proficient reader. Very, very fast. She inhales this stuff. I could see why. I really, really like this book. What's the book? Well, if you saw the title, you know. But I want to talk to you guys today about Jim Butcher's Stormfront. This is the first book of the Dresden Files. And if you're not familiar with the Dresden Files, I believe they have 14 or 15 books as of the time of this recording, but they started way back when, in April of 2000. I was still a senior in high school. God, I feel old. Really old. But this series is definitely very revered. It was hand-selected by the infamous Big C. If you want to know more about Big C, you can go ahead and click the card now. That'll take you to book review number 1. You get an introduction to my boy Big C, and you can hear why am I even interested in audiobooks, specifically the Dresden Files. Well, it has a lot to do with him. So, what is the Dresden Files about? Well, it's a witty old soul who is a wizard solving supernatural mysteries. Now, there's a lot of tropes that go into that. You have the murder mystery part, the whodunit. You have the old soul part, which I think I relate to the most. A guy whose handshake means something, a guy who says he's going to get something done, a guy who prefers the old way because it was reliable. The one thing that is not is actually an old guy. And when I get to the criticism of the audiobook portion of that comment will make a little bit more sense. It's also that fantasy element. So he's going to be interacting with vampires and magical spells and fairies and a council of wizards who govern wizardry. Lots and lots of interesting characters you're going to meet along the way. And that wit, the wit that he has, the whole story is told from his perspective. The way he thinks about things, the way he makes jokes about things, the way he comments about things, I related to that. I'll get into that criticism in a moment as well. But everything that he does makes sense in the moment. And the story is told in a very logical way that doesn't feel too hand-holdy or overly narrative for narrative's sake. We don't have like 20-page expositions or 20-minute expositions, I should say, on explaining something. It just is. He doesn't explain to you what a blasting rod ever is, but through context, you can kind of start to understand what a blasting rod might be, as an example. And I like that it just flows. If this guy was sitting explaining to you this story, like he's obviously, someone was reading it to me. James Marsters was reading it to me. But if he was like, hey, this is what I did today, and then he read through the story, I would never interrupt him and be like, excuse me, sir, what's a blasting rod? I would just let him talk because I was so lost in the moment at times. And it just naturally felt like I was included in the story. He explained things that really mattered. The stuff that didn't matter as much, he just glossed over and mentioned it kind of tangentially and then got back to the stuff that was important. And I really liked that. The stakes felt high at times when they needed to be. And then there were some more low-key moments where it got more monologue-driven as he didn't really explain line for line the conversation, but he would instead just summarize it. Like, I talked to this person and gave her the information, and we hung up. It wasn't like a line for line, like, how are you? Good. How are you? You know, it wasn't like that. And I appreciated all of that. It makes the runtime significantly shorter in the audiobook. It ran about 8 hours. And it flowed very quickly. Obviously, I blew through it in like 3 days. I've already got the second book on order through the library. I'm in queue to get the book number 2. I want to continue with this series. I'm invested in who Harry Dresden is. the world that he's created, the characters he's created, the universe, kind of what's at stake, it all felt very real to me. And it's interesting to think of this supernatural, crazy world that is kind of overlaying on top of the regular civilian world. But there are kind of logical explanations that humanity is willing to accept. It's kind of like the TV show Evil, which I started watching. It's actually funny how certain forms of media seem to run in parallel in my life. But similar to that, if you're familiar with that show. Either way, Harry Dresden is a great character, and I do recommend you read this book, and I do recommend you invest yourself in the story because it was fun. And it did have some twists and it had some good turns. And there was definitely some stuff in there that I didn't see coming. And there was some funny jokes in there. And there was some shock and some of the goofy things that he explains. I felt like I was there. And that's the most immersive thing you could say about an audiobook, right? However, this is where the criticisms come in. Nothing to do with the story minus one thing. Back to the humor piece. I get in trouble with my wife often because she says I joke too much. I'll make a joke and she says that was hurtful. Why did you say that? Not just to her, but just in general. And I'm like, hey, I was just making a joke. I was just riffing. And kind of part of the comedian routine, which I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a comedian, but I am a witty guy. Not all jokes are going to land. You do get some bombs in there and you just kind of groan and roll with the punches, but typically I'll tell you 100 jokes and you'll laugh 9 out of 10 times. That's pretty good. Maybe the 10th time you go, ooh, that was a little too far, or a little too soon, or a little too raw. But, you can't turn it off. And I understand that the Harry Dresden character can't really turn it off either. I can't. And like I said, I do get into arguments over like, hey, you need to knock it off and be serious now. And I'm making jokes. The problem is, not the one being the Joker, who, of course, I'm the funniest guy in the room, right? But the other part of it, the watching it, right? The listening to it, it does grate on you a little bit, specifically in moments of high tension and high stress, when which you're talking about something serious and he's got a running monologue of jokes in the background, or when he's overseeing some horrific act and he's making jokes in the background, or he's in a perilous situation where life or death is on the line and he's making jokes in the background. It's a lot to take in at times, and it is very frustrating, and it doesn't have to be that way, but it does. And the only criticism I could give to the work itself, I hope going forward, some of that's dialed back. Now, in the moment when I am telling jokes, some of them don't land as well, right? You read the room wrong. But Jim Butcher is writing a book. He's having other people review it. He has time to process and kind of reread what he's written, refine the script before it becomes a book. I don't see why that would be not a good time to scrub that. That's my biggest criticism. And it does take you out of the story sometimes. The other thing that takes you out of the story significantly more is James Marsters. Now, not James Marsters himself, phenomenal narrator. He throws his voice for female and male characters. He has shock and fear and excitement and awe and pitch. And when he's riffing in his head as Harry Dresden is thinking about something, James Marsters' delivery is phenomenal. It's so good. But I could have sworn Harry Dresden was like a 70-year-old guy looking at this book cover, and I didn't have this book cover. In my version of the book, it's a picture of a house with like skyscrapers behind it, stormfront. I would have thought he was an old guy. He's not an old guy. He's a young guy. But James Marsters' delivery, and I do blame the audio team for this, not so much him, is very wet and old sounding. Go listen to a recent interview with Clint Eastwood. He's got a very, very clear way of speaking. He doesn't slur. He's got very clear narration. He's clearly an actor. When he speaks, it's fluent and eloquent, but it's wet. He does this kind of like he's got gum in his cheeks or spittle in his cheeks, and he's always swallowing it down. He's gulping. He's drowning in his I don't want to say juices because that sounds really perverted, but you get my point, right? This is what happens with James Marsters. And for some reason, the tech team didn't edit this out. They left it in. So it's like, I'm getting ready to conjure a spell and this is what I did. And it's like, oh, dude, are you drinking water? What are you doing? There's other times where in between the chapters, and this might be the book company being lazy or the library receiving it and the guy just shoving the discs into the drive from an audiobook. But you're a high tense moment, the house is on fire, they're all about to die, and then it pauses for a second. Please insert the next CD to continue the story. It's like, what? It just takes you out of it. And there's a couple times where they clearly did some editing and the words spliced together too quickly, like they butted two words together, or they had him redo a take and they didn't clean it up properly. Now, I hear that problem does get resolved later on. When they do get a new company starting at like book 4, I think, that they get a new company that comes in and begins to clean up the audio performance a little bit. But the first book I did struggle, and honestly, it did make me almost want to stop. It really did. It was that annoying to me. The audio quality was that poor to me. The constant buzzing, the weird, very wet sounding James Marsters, some of the bad editing, it did take me out of the story. And I was like, I don't know if I can put up with 8 hours of this. I really don't. I don't know if I could sit there for 8 hours and be like, hey, I'm just going to plow through this. Now, thankfully, the story did pick up and I was whisked away to Fantasyland. But I will admit, even in the closing moments, I was actively counting how many more times he would slurp. And I heard quite a few. And it's like, I shouldn't be watching this as a critic. I should be lost in the worlds. I should be lost in that moment, just listening and wanting to hear what happens next, not laughing at the poor guy. And I did. That's my big criticism of the audiobook side. And if it does continue through the next book, I'll bring it up again then too. But for as much money as these companies have for professional sound equipment, like for me, I am very confident that I sound clear to you. I would agree my camera isn't the best. I have a crappy webcam and a single fan light behind me. But you're not paying me anything to produce this. If I was producing a video for real, I would be using my cell phone, I'd be using my light ring, I'd be using natural light. If I'm an audio company and you're asking me to record something, I'm not giving you some buzzy ass microphone. And I'm gonna make sure that we're knocking out plosives. And I'm gonna make sure that if you have a bad take, I'm gonna have you reread something. And I'm gonna adjust the audio levels so you're not really loud in one book and a little quieter in the next. I don't get it. If I was Jim Butcher, honestly, I would have them re-record this. But they signed off on it, clearly. It's got a zillion views on Amazon. It is a critically successful story. So I'm glad this didn't dismiss them from doing it, but it's unacceptable. But the book itself, if you end up reading the book, you're going to have an absolute blast. If you listen to the audiobook, suck your teeth and get through it. It's still a good story. And I'll be back with book number 2 for my next book review, whenever that is. I don't even have it yet, so it's going to be a while for real. It's not one of these, oh, just kidding, I got a new audiobook review coming tomorrow. I'm in queue. You're going to have to wait it out. That's it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves. And until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.